protests is now over 130. The former Prime Minister lost many of her own security people in it, and she's calling for an inquiry into why her procession route was travelling through an area in darkness at the time of the bombings. Bhutto's vowing the attack will not derail her political aspirations. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, this report from Tim Friend on the day after.
This press conference became a speech, perhaps even an historic one. Benazir Bhutto came into her garden in the only way she could, defiantly.
Dictatorship fuels the forces of extremism as well as the narcotics trade. Fearing democracy, these cowards attacked a woman and they attacked the unarmed men and children and women accompanying me.
This was pure politics. But there was also specific criticism of the authorities. She demanded an inquiry into why streetlights had been turned off, making an attack easier.
And while I'm not blaming the government for the assassination attacks on me at this stage, nonetheless we need to have an inquiry as to why the streetlights had been shut.
Well, this press conference is just breaking up, and I suspect over the coming days and weeks there'll be much analysing of what Benazir Bhutto had to say. Whether or not she can continue to pursue her ambition to be an elected Prime Minister of Pakistan for a third time remains to be seen. Obviously, recent events have thrown the whole situation into jeopardy. Earlier, her armoured political battle bus bore witness to the ferocity of the attack. It was scarred, scorched and cracked. Benazir Bhutto had stepped from its roof to go inside just a few minutes before the blast. Many of her key supporters were injured, the bombs just a few metres away. Further down the road, more stark evidence of the attack. A car wrecked by the explosions, mangled wreckage from which the dead and injured were retrieved. And debris from the blast itself, pellets that scattered far and wide. The scenes immediately after the explosion were chaotic. Many people were injured because they ran to help after the first bomb, only to be caught in the second blast. The political repercussions of all this are immense. Benazir Bhutto's hopes of becoming Prime Minister for a third time are now being reassessed. At the hospital, doctors and nurses are still battling to help the injured. Sometimes the anger of friends and relatives spills out onto the corridors.
They are killing innocent people. They are not leaving us to proceed us in the democracy.
This man was one of those caught in the second blast when he went to help. He told me the first blast occurred, so I went to try to help out. Then the second blast happened and I was knocked unconscious. After that, I can't remember what happened. The finger of blame for the attack is being pointed at tribal fighters. Benazir Bhutto has said under certain circumstances that she would support the so-called war on terror in Pakistan. It quickly won her death threats, now for many a stark reality. One top official standing close to Ms. Bhutto spoke for the first time about what happened.
There was blood, glass, singed flesh. It was just sulfur burning everywhere. So it was pretty bad, and while we were scrambling to get up and not panic and get everyone together to see what happens, there was a second blast. The second blast flattened us all again to the ground, and it took us another 20 minutes to evacuate slowly because there were a fair amount of women also on the truck.
It's becoming increasingly clear that this huge attack could have been far more devastating. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Karachi.
So what now for the future of Pakistan? The country's been sliding towards radicalism and unrest for quite some time. Many hoped Bhutto's return could help set Islamabad on a new course. Kamal Haider looks at what it all means for a nation in turmoil.
After 8 years in exile, former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto's return was meant to herald a new era in Pakistani politics. Instead, the attack on her life have cut to the core of Pakistan's complicated political landscape. Permission for Bhutto to return was granted after corruption charges against her were dropped. Months of negotiations that involved high-level meetings between her and General Musharraf produced a tacit agreement between the two leaders. General Musharraf, whose military rule in Pakistan has been severely weakened in recent months, allowed Bhutto to return. In exchange, she would support the president's staunchly pro-Western policies so long as he quit his post as military chief. Thursday's attacks may force Bhutto's hand closer to Musharraf to join forces in fighting what they perceive as extremism, putting the two in the same political camp. But there is doubt that the alliance will work. Bhutto's PPP is no longer the dominant party in Pakistani politics, and it enjoys little popularity in important areas in Pakistan, such as Punjab and the Northwest Frontier Province. Her party rule has been weakened by the departure of key senior leaders, further undermining her ability to shape national politics and build consensus.
I think that in the upcoming days, the free and fair election would decide the fate of the leadership and the fate of the political parties in the country. And now it depends on the circumstances, and it depends on the government.
For us, though, ultimately the choice of who's going to lead
But the US is hoping that the re-emergence of Bhutto's secular party will shore up a weakened President Musharraf, one of the strongest allies it has in the so-called war on terror. Despite the threats against her life, Bhutto was adamant she return immediately to Pakistani politics, and her deal with President Musharraf allowed it to happen. Perhaps highlighting how much these one-time political foes, now turned allies, really do need each other. President General Pervez Musharraf and Benazir Bhutto may be friends again, but the people of Pakistan will be hoping that the president also extend an olive branch to all the political parties in this country and find an amicable solution to a spiraling problem that could endanger the security of this state. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
Some other news now. A blast in a Manila shopping centre has left at least 8 people dead and more than 100 wounded. Early police reports said a fuel tanker was to blame, but officials later said traces of explosives had been found. The Philippines' capital, as you might imagine, is now on high alert. Margaret Tigas has more from Manila.
The aftermath of what Philippine authorities are calling the largest explosion the country has ever seen. A powerful blast ripped through this busy shopping mall in the heart of Manila's financial district at lunchtime.
Just behind me is what police believe is ground zero of the explosion, a popular noodle house where they believe the bomb was hidden in its storage room.
Initial reports said a gas leak may have caused the explosion, but when the dust settled, the extent of the devastation had police changing their theory. The bomb caused extensive damage through the mall's 3 stories, and police believe people may still be trapped in the rubble within. Authorities have been careful to lay blame, suspecting either communist insurgents or the Abu Sayyaf group, which has ties to Al-Qaeda. The Philippines' National Security Advisor, Bert Gonzalez, said the government has received reports that both groups are now training their fighters together. But many Filipinos no longer have faith in their government's words. This explosion comes at a time there is widespread discontent with President Arroyo's administration. There are growing accusations of corruption against her and renewed calls for her impeachment. There is reported unrest brewing among the military as well. President Arroyo has called on the opposition not to take advantage of this situation, and she said there is no cause for alarm. She also said she will not be declaring a state of emergency. Security forces, however, have been put on high alert. 2,000 more policemen will be stationed throughout the city, and checkpoints will be set up. Friday's explosion has just reminded a nation growing increasingly disillusioned with their government that there are other concerns than corruption. Until there is stability in its political arena, there will be opportunities for further violence in the country. Margaret Tigas, Al Jazeera, Manila.
A Canadian pedophile suspect is now in Thai custody after a global manhunt. Christopher Neal is accused of sexually abusing over a dozen boys, some of them as young as 6 years old. It was an unprecedented public appeal by Interpol using a digitally unscrambled picture, which led to his capture. Selena Downs has the details.
The Canadian suspect, Christopher Paul Neal, was picked up here in Thailand in Nakhon Ratchasima, an area northeast of Bangkok. People there alerted the authorities after recognising Neal from a series of photographs distributed by the international police organisation Interpol. He had been the subject of a worldwide manhunt. He was wanted in connection with the alleged abuse of young boys. He's thought to be the man who's appeared in some 200 online images of alleged sexual abuse.